Let's talk about lighting. Now, just like photography, lighting is everything when it comes to videography. And unfortunately, it's a step that's often overlooked or skipped, especially when it comes to newer videographers, which is a real shame because it's a great way to make your videos stand out. Now, if I had to make a guess as to why I thought this was often overlooked, it's because it seems intimidating. It can be complex and maybe even expensive if you don't have any lights. Where do you begin? What do you need to buy? Well, friend, I'm no cinematographer, but I have spent several years producing video and I've learned a few things along the way. And so today I want to break this down for you. We're going to talk about a traditional 3 or 4 light setup, the exact lights that you need for every video production. I'm going to walk you through a couple of real life examples where I've lit a scene and I'll talk through some of the creative things that I did to bring it to life without spending a whole lot of money. And then I also want to take you through some camera basics as well. If you want to start messing with things like ISO, aperture, shutter speed to figure out your correct exposure in different lighting scenarios, I want to walk you through a couple of best practices just to make the process really simple. Now, if you are just getting started out and you're shooting in automatic mode, your camera's going to do all this for you. So that's great and you can hang out right there. But if you do want to flip over to manual mode and start dabbling with some of those more advanced settings, hopefully I'll give you a few takeaways that'll make the process a bit simpler for you. So why don't we get started with the lights that we need? Let's talk through this traditional 3 or 4 light setup. Every video is going to need a key light. This is your main primary light that usually sits somewhere around the camera aimed directly at your subject, or in the case of today, it could be off to one side or the other. Now my key light is a softbox off to my left or your right of the screen. It is the brightest source of light on my face, and that is what I'm going to be using for this video. Now, the next light that you'll probably need for your video is going to be a fill light. In the example of today's video, my fill light is free. I am shooting directly in front of a window that faces west. So anytime I'm shooting afternoon, the sun is high in the sky and I get a lot of light bleed through this, even though the blinds are closed and the curtains are drawn. It is a soft light, so you don't see a whole lot of it, but it is filling up the room quite a bit. Now, you don't have to go out and buy fill light. You might have an additional softbox that you could position a bit further away from the subject just to create some of that dimension, the shadows of the face. However, you could use a reflector or even a mirror of some kind just to bounce some of that additional light. It'll be softer, it'll be a little dimmer, and that's the look that you're often going for. So that's number 2, your fill light. Number 3 is going to be a backlight. Now, this is often used to illuminate or light up your backdrop, if you will. But it could also be turned toward the back of your subject to create this glowing halo effect around them. Now, if you're shooting in a dark studio or an office setting where you don't have any ambient light coming through, you may need that light just to light up the background so that it doesn't look like your subject's just floating in a blank space. And the 4th light that I always like to include somewhere in any one of my videos is what's called a practical light. Now, this light has nothing to do with lighting up your subject. It's simply just there to create some visual intrigue. In my video, you see I've got this blue glow on my desk behind me. Again, that's doing nothing. It's not casting any blue on me. It's just there to create some visual interest. And you might see this in other videos where there's a lamp positioned somewhere or another, and I will talk through some of the practicals that I used in the lighting scenarios that we'll get to here in a moment. So without further ado, why don't we jump to my computer because I want to pull up a couple of stills from some productions that I did over the last 12 months and just talk through where my head was at and how I was able to achieve each look. Let's dive in. Now, this first scene was a fun one to light. This was a video I did a few months ago, obviously around Christmas time. It was about coloring your log footage. So I wanted there to be a lot of dynamic range in color, contrast, but also have some fun lights going on. As busy as this looks, it's really just a traditional 3 or 4 light setup. And I'll talk through that. So obviously the brightest side of my face is my left side or the right side of your screen. This is where my key light is. I have a softbox just to the right of the screen, just out of frame. And that is where my primary light source is coming from. That's where the brightest light is coming from. It's quite close to me on that side. Now on this other side, you're going to see this red or orange glow. Because it was Christmas time, I wanted to give you this warm, cozy, inviting environment. So I put the fake fireplace on the TV, but the TV wasn't bright enough and it wasn't nearly close enough to my face to actually cast any sort of hue or glow. So what you can't see is just outside of frame here on the left, or it would be my right, are 2 small RGB panels I picked up from Amazon, I think for $35, $40, somewhere in there. and they have a flame flicker effect. So I set them both to this flicker effect. It's just an orange light that kind of twinkles in and out. And I turn the brightness all the way up. And so this orange glow that you're seeing on my sleeve, and then of course on my face over here, is actually coming from those panels. If I played the video back, or if you go back a few months and find this video, look closely, you'll notice that the light actually flickers a bit on my face. It's not coming from the TV. I faked it with some RGB panels. Now, as far as a fill light goes, I didn't really use a fill light, but you'll see this lamp here in the background. This is more acting like a practical light, if you will. There is a second identical lamp further up on this table, a bit more in front of me, which kind of acts as a fill light, but it's more so just to light up this wall. It really wasn't casting that much light on my face, but you can see that there's not a heavy shadow. It does balance out pretty nicely. And then of course, my tree, I have the practical light in the background. I shot this, my aperture, I think I had it set to f-stop 2.8. So I'm getting a nice shallow depth of field, a nice bokeh, and it really softened those Christmas lights. So you get that twinkling effect. Very cool. This was a fun way to light the scene. Now, if I move on to the next one here, here's a video I did for an organization a few months ago. This was fun to work with, but I had to fly across the country. I was limited on the gear that I could bring to the shoot. So I think I only had with me 2 softboxes. I had those same RGB panels as well, but I didn't use them here. What you're seeing on the screen right now is actually, I only used 1 softbox. And so once again, you're seeing the brightest side of his face is coming from the left or his right. That is not this lamp that you see in the background. It's actually coming from my softbox, which is just out of frame here on the left. That lamp was not even in this conference room at the time of the video. I walked around the office and found that lamp in a corner somewhere. There are actually 2 of them. One of them had a bright white bulb, just wasn't going to work for the video. And the second one had this really warm amber tone. And I thought, oh, that would be so inviting. Really cool contrast with their blue logo to have kind of more of an orange, complementary color thing going on here. So we put that light in the background. It gives the illusion as though that lamp is what is lighting his face. But the truth is it's a softbox positioned a bit more in front of him. And so that's why you're getting some of the highlights even straight on at his nose and his forehead. In the back here, you see we have this blown out window. Now, it was a very blustery, wintry Massachusetts day, so it didn't look much different than this, even in real life. You can see there's a car out there in the parking lot. But because the window was so small and it's positioned off kind of in that far side of the video, it didn't distract too much from our subject. And what I didn't intend that happened quite nicely is it brought in, you see these highlights back here on his ear, the back of the head, and up here in the hair. It created this really neat halo-y glow backlight effect coming from that window without flooding the room too much. Now, one thing I do want to mention here as well, we're shooting in a conference room. So I shut off all the overhead lights. Same with my living room video of the Christmas tree. Turned off all the house lights. And the only lights that are on in this room right now are this lamp, my softbox, and then of course, the window you're getting in the background. The way this office is set up, the gentleman is actually looking at another person standing in a doorway off to the left side of the screen. He is the one asking the questions, and then he is simply answering them in this interview. Now, where my camera is, I'm in another doorway. But because these doors had to be open, I needed to shut the lights off in pretty much the entire office so that we didn't have anything flooding in or bleeding in. Really enjoyed the contrast between light and dark for shooting this particular scene. We did add his laptop here with their company website, and then of course their logo on the mug for some visual interest. You could call this even potentially a practical light, but mainly the practical here is going to be that big lamp in the corner. Shot it with 1 single softbox, and then you could argue that this is a backlight back here, but I just used some natural light and got really creative with positioning him in front of the table and how I framed this so that I would get the composition and lighting that I wanted. Okay, so now that we've set up our scene, we got to tell our camera how to see it. Our eyes, we don't have to make any changes to our eyes because our eyes do a fantastic job of automatically filtering out the proper amount of light to expose and help us to see things the best way that our brains can interpret it. Now with our camera, it's not always the same. If you're shooting in automatic mode, once again, it's gonna do all this for you. But if you're in manual mode, there are a few things that we need to adjust. 3 things specifically we need to adjust to make sure that our exposure is gonna come in clear, there won't be any noise in our image, and we're not gonna have any of that weird blurry motion effect. So let's go ahead and start with ISO. Now, this is a number ranging anywhere from 100 to sometimes in the hundreds of thousands on your camera based on the quality of your camera. But every camera has a native ISO or an ISO that when you're shooting video, it is most comfortable. It has the best performance. And today I'm on the Canon EOS R8 camera, and I find that that's somewhere in the 500 to 800 range based on my lighting scenario. So if I can help it, I try really hard to keep that ISO low. Anywhere at 800 to 500 is kind of where I try to keep my camera at based on my lighting environment. Anything above that is where you're gonna start to introduce some of that grain, some of that noise. But we don't wanna go too low and just not capture anything at all. The image will be too dark. So we just wanna make sure that we're adjusting accordingly. So if you can find that sweet spot on your camera, I would try to build everything else off of that number. So today, I believe I'm shooting at ISO 500 for this particular video, which means I then need to figure out the look that I'm going for. And to do that, we're gonna jump to our aperture. Our aperture is basically the hole in the camera that gets wider or smaller to allow more light in or less light in. Now, the larger the number, the smaller the hole, and that is gonna create more of a shallow depth of field. So if we have an aperture of, say, f-stop 16, you're gonna see everything in focus. Everything is gonna be clear. It's a very wide depth of field versus aperture 2.8 or f-stop 2.8 like I'm filming at today. You see that I am in focus, but my desk is starting to get a little blurry, right? There's a little softness to it. You would call this a bokeh effect. And so you want to dial that in as well. So we have our ISO set, so we kind of have, we know how much light that we're playing with. If you bring your aperture too far down, you're squeezing that hole and not letting nearly as much light in. And so that's going to cause a difference in lighting as well as to what your camera is going to be interpreting. So play around with that. If you want that shallow depth of field and it's starting to get too dark, you may have to increase or adjust your ISO accordingly. But hopefully where you're at so far, we can leave our ISO right around 800-ish, somewhere in that range, and then bring your aperture down to the level to create that depth of field that you're looking for. And the last component, the third leg of the table of exposure, is going to be your shutter speed. Now, this is a little bit easier, at least for my brain to comprehend, that the slower the shutter speed or the slower that shutter is opening and closing and allowing light in, the more it's gonna see, it's gonna allow for that motion blur. So if I have a really low, slow shutter speed and I'm moving my hands like this, you're just gonna see all kinds of motion blur. It's gonna be very distracting. This would be terrible for sports or filming children or vehicles, anything with a lot of movement. You do not want to slow shutter speed. You want to bump that way up. Now, as you know, the faster that little shutter box is opening and closing, less light is able to get through. And so as we raise up that shutter speed, your image is going to start to get darker again. So I'm finding somewhere in the 100 to 125 range when you're shooting just a static video like this, cameras on a tripod, there's very little movement, except for my wild hands, going on here. But you would need to bump that up considerably if you were filming sports or action sequences where there's a lot of movement. And so play around with these settings a little bit. If you can find one or two of them where you can leave them mostly in the environment that you're in. For example, this is a pretty controlled environment. Not much changes about the lighting in this room, except for when I'm shooting later in the day and I have a lot more sunlight coming through. That's something that I need to expose for. But for the most part, I can adjust. I know that my ISO works right around 500 to 800 in this room. I know that I can have my aperture down to 2.8 and get that shallow depth of field. And my shutter speed needs to hang out around 125. And so that's what I'm doing from the exposure side of things. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of comfortability, a little bit of confidence. If you're going into a brightly lit situation, start with your ISO and figure out how much light you need to be pulling into the camera where it's not so bright that things are getting washed out and that it's not so dim that if you try to pull that up, you're going to be introducing some of that grain or some of that noise. Be be finding out what depth of field or what focus you want to pull for your scene. And then of course, pull in that shutter speed based on if there's movement. If there's no movement, that will determine whether or not you need a quick shutter speed or a slow shutter speed. So using all of these three features, these three settings in tandem is how you're gonna, it's the exposure triangle, right? It's how you're going to appropriately expose for any lighting scenario. Now, friend, if you want to learn more about video production as a whole and not just the lighting side of things, go to guidedproductions.com/bettervideoguide. Download my free copy of the 6 steps to creating better video. It's a PDF that I've created walking you through the entire production process from idea to export, giving you the confidence to walk out there and get everything right the first time around. In fact, the last page is a checklist, so you can follow along with every shoot and make sure you never miss a step. It's my free gift to say thanks for spending this time with me because I know that your time is valuable. So again, guidedproductions.com/bettervideoguide. Get your free copy there today. Friend, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope this has been helpful, but if you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'd be happy to interact with you. But go out there, explore different lighting scenes, lighting scenarios, try picking up a couple of different lights. And even if it's not a softbox or a traditional light, start playing around with sunlight. See how you can bounce it around your room and get really creative with using the free light that God gave us and go create something amazing. Friend, have a great day and I will see you on another video real soon.